we're going to be going through one of the most important things to learn if you want to sound as good as possible when speaking English. I'm talking today about contractions. Yes, he's, she's, it's, whose. Now, you probably already know those and more. But today we'll dive a little deeper into the subject. Now, not only do contractions provide lovely fluidity to your speech, but learning them will help to vastly improve your English. In fact, my students often complain about the fact they can't always understand all the words when a native speaker speaks. A good amount of misheard or non-heard words are contractions. So, with that in mind, today's lesson will of course be about pronunciation, a little bit of grammar, and no doubt will expand your vocabulary a little bit too. Okay, now contractions are perfect for conversational English and informal situations. So, what's a contraction? A contraction is when we take two words and we shorten them into one word. For example, that is becomes that's. You will becomes you'll, etc. Today we're going to discuss positive contractions. In a future lesson, we'll focus on negative contractions. Now, on with the lesson. Take one contraction I'm sure you already know. It's. It is. You'll notice that we use the apostrophe to replace missing letters. In this case, it's simply the I in is, and this is how we form contractions. We usually combine a verb, auxiliary, or modal with a pronoun. There are exceptions, of course. It is English after all. The most important contractions are formed with am, is, are, has, have, had, and would, will. So let's first look at how to pronounce contractions that include the be verb, as in am, is, and are. Okay, first up, I am. Contracted, this is pronounced as I'm.
I'm going into the office early today. I'm having a sandwich for lunch today.
Next, he is. This becomes he's.
He's at the coffee shop already. You could go and meet him. He's a first-rate carpenter.
Now, she is, which is pronounced as she's.
She's the most likely candidate for the job. She's a very promising writer.
We've already mentioned it is, as in it's, so let's have some examples.
It's my niece Carly's 7th birthday today. It's going to be a scorcher today, so mind you don't burn on the beach.
Next is you are, which becomes your.
You're going to go far in this company.
We are becomes where.
We're going to be late for dinner if we don't start off now.
Lastly, they are is their.
They're going to be late for the flight if they miss the bus.
Now, let's look at the contractions for has, had, and have. They can be used as contractions, but only when they're auxiliary verbs. This is important to remember. We can't use have, has, or has a contraction if it's the main verb in the sentence. Let's look at some examples. I had only been at the company for 2 weeks before it closed. Had in that sentence is an auxiliary verb. We can use it as a contraction there, as in,
I'd only been at the company for 2 weeks before it closed.
in this next sentence, I had a cup of tea with Helen this afternoon. It's the main verb of the sentence. We can't contract it. We can't say I'd a cup of tea. It has to be.
I had a cup of tea with Helen this afternoon.
Now, let's take a look at has. There's she has, she's.
She's been a good friend to me.
Next, he has, he's.
He's been doing the cooking today.
Lastly, it has, its.
It's been a great night out. Let's do it again sometime.
Now, these three can be confusing because they have the same pronunciation and spelling as the contracted form of she is, he is, and it is. The key here is that context should make it clear which one we're using. Look at how the sentence has been conjugated, and if there's a past participle after the contraction, it means that the contraction represents has. So, for example, if you see been, eaten, or seen, then usually apostrophe s will be has. Okay, let's look at to have. I have becomes I've.
I've been waiting in this queue for hours.
Next, you have is you've.
You've got to try this apple pie. It's delicious.
We have is we've.
We've got to get there on time.
Now we have had. I had is I'd.
I'd been in England for 2 years before visiting London.
You had becomes you'd.
You wouldn't be in this mess if you'd listened to me.
She had is she'd.
She'd been sleeping all day when I called her.
He had becomes he'd.
He'd better not be late for the meeting.
We had becomes we'd.
We'd already sold the car when your friend asked about it.
They had becomes they'd.
They'd eaten everything in the fridge.
Now let's look at the contractions for would. They're very similar to the contractions for had, and there are a couple of rules we can follow. First, let's look at the pronunciation. I would, I'd.
I'd like to visit the British Museum.
You would, you'd.
You'd be better off getting a bicycle.
He would, he'd.
He'd like to take extra lessons to improve his English.
She would, she'd.
She'd like you to arrive at 7 on the dot.
It would, it'd.
It'd be a pleasure to show you around the city.
We would, we'd.
We'd like a table by the window, please.
They would, they'd.
They'd like to try that new restaurant we went to last week.
So, how do we know if contractions like I'd and we'd are representing had or would? Well, here are some rules to follow. A simple way to remember if I'd is I had or I would is if it's I'd plus the bare infinitive, which is the original verb without to, then it's I would. If it's I'd plus verb 3 past participle, then it's I had. Okay, let's move on to will. We have I will, I'll.
I'll be back home at 7 this evening.
You will, you'll.
You'll need to revise a lot for the test.
He will, he'll.
He'll try to deliver the package before noon.
She will, she'll.
She'll make you a chocolate cake for your birthday.
It will, it'll.
It'll take us around 4 hours to get there.
We will, we'll.
We'll be able to see the whole village from the top of that hill.
They will, they'll.
They'll get soaked if they go outside now. It's pouring down.
There will, they'll.
There'll be another showing of the movie at 8 o'clock.
Okay, you've reached the end of this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be looking at more contractions again very soon. Bye bye for now.